Hi everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. So JP is fine, that was a great example. Jean-Pascal is always just terrible to pronounce, but I assume that Finnish people are used to that when they're going abroad as well. Yeah, I'm an immersive sound director, and as such, I believe in a future of digital where everything is more immersive, more engaging, more informative because of audio. And I've co-founded a studio called Headspace Studio. We're based in Montreal, and we have a studio in Los Angeles as well. Oh, one thing I wanted to say, as the Canadian in the room, I'm not a big hockey fan, but I've heard that you guys have... So, congratulations, officially from Canada. This is a slide, if you guys know this guy over there, Colin, who's head of interactive and VR at Oculus and Facebook. We've been working with them since the very first Oculus came out, and every year at Oculus Connect, which is a conference in the United States, Colin goes over a timeline and he lists what are to him the medium-defining pieces of VR, and so far we've been very, very lucky to have worked on a piece every year since. These have won Emmy Awards, Cirque du Soleil, NBA, this fabulous guy. I'm sure you're not a big fan of the other orange guy. Neither are we. This is the pieces that we've participated in this year at Sundance, Tribeca, and next week in Annecy. So that's a piece with rap artist Eminem, Gloomy Eyes, which is a fantastic animation piece, and Gymnasia, which is stop motion. So we've covered a lot of ground, Cirque being the closest, I think, to what you have that would be similar to opera and ballet, although it's really just entertainment. This is another piece we're working on at the moment, which is quite fantastic. We have we're working with Felix and Paul Studios, and I have a camera inside the International Space Station. And I can tell you that in VR, just being in front of someone floating in front of you is quite impressive. That's about it for the pieces we've been working on. A quick overview, though, of what I feel is more akin to opera and ballet, even though it's circus. Some pieces we did with Cirque, Curious, Dreams of O, Lucia, and Ka. And we're going to come back to a few of these later on because they provide great examples of things that are important, I feel, for bringing these arts into the new century. So I'm no ballet nor opera expert, so I'm looking forward to learn all from you. So many people, at least I would say in Montreal, experience opera and ballet as an historical art form. And of course, the challenge is how do we make sure that this is culturally relevant today and tomorrow, right? In Montreal, I would say, and I had a discussion about someone from Finland who lives in Montreal, the ballet company, the opera company in Montreal, it really feels when you go that it's like a relic. Whereas I must say that I've been extremely impressed with this institution here, and I'm sure you're all super proud of it, and should be, because with Esa-Pekka and all this team, it's really bringing it into the 21st century. So I did a bit of research. What's going on where do we come from in opera and with classical stage arts? And I found this thing, which I thought was pretty, well, that's a roadmap for what we need to do, right? The Spectator Trent plants himself upon the stage by means of all his visual and oral faculties. In the process, he forgets the confines of the auditorium and lives and breathes only in the artwork, which seems to him as life itself, and on the stage, which seems the wide expanse of the whole world. So that could have been written yesterday, but that's Wagner in 1849. And so, I mean, this, at least you've got a guide of where you need to go, right? You've got the opportunity to realize Wagner's dream by bringing these mediums into XR. And I'm going to transit to sound, because that's what I'm here for. So this is one of my favorite use of sound in cinema, which is more of my background. It's a scene by the Coen brothers, this wonderful film called Barton Fink, which I assume you might have seen. If not, don't miss it. And this is one of the first scenes, and you have the title character, Barton Fink, entering an old lobby hotel, looking around. There's no one. He sees this bell on the clerk counter, so he just goes to it and taps. And it rings and rings and rings for a really, really long time. And then when there's a bit of discomfort, you see the clerk coming out of a trap beside the counter and just putting his hand on that bell and stop it. So probably other directors might have used something more obvious, like, you know, a weird or odd musical piece to set the tone. But the Coen brothers, really understanding how to use sound, were able to set everything around this, right? So light props, everything involved in filming a scene around a sound design piece, which would be finished, of course, in post-production. So I think that's, if there's one takeaway where I want to get you at, and that's the thing I would say I'm facing all the time, is that audio is often brought into a project way too late in the process, right? So this scene, for example, couldn't have been written post-production, right? You can go and say, hey, I've got this great idea. We're just going to have the bell ring for 25 seconds. Do you have a shot where it's like super long? No, of course not, right? So it's really important to have sound people have this second brain, looking at the drama, looking at the story, and see if there's any opportunities to elevate the story and connect more with sound. This is the ugliest slide I've ever made, and it's on purpose because I feel it's a good representation of how we usually, yes, that is comics IMS. That's usually how we perceive sound, right? It's icing on the cake. It's something that comes after, right? But my message is really the best cake as sound baked in really at the beginning of the process. So all this to say that the best opportunities for sound to elevate and engage with the user, actually user is not great, we prefer participant, right, nowadays, are written, okay? So at the script writing stage, that's where I feel it's the most important. This is something you might encounter in real life, especially here with all the beautiful nature in the city, and it's something you might see in a game. It's actually from a game we worked on, and this is a good representation of what sound is. This is completely still. You may be working in, imagine you're in VR, SIG stuff, and you're working in there. Nothing is moving, but you hear something, and that tells you, because sound is always an event unfolding, right? It's always something happening. With spatial audio, what's even more remarkable is you know where it's coming from. We're going to get later to more of the design principles, but which brings me to a word about spatial audio. It would have been great to have you hear spatial audio, right? But that's one of the most difficult things. It's to render it, especially in a theater. They are new. And I'm sure if you're working in theater, you've heard that that's a place where it's going, for instance, to be able to follow a character on stage. And that's a question I had for Sarah yesterday when she was talking about the avatar. If you're going to have a virtual character on stage at some point, and especially in opera, where all the presence of the singer comes from the voice, and the fact that you're able to identify that voice, that beautiful projection is coming directly from this person and not from washed out in the sound field, right? Last month, I was at a concert of Kronos Quartet, and I got the best tickets I could get. I was 4-row. I'm like, this is great. I'm going to be close to them. I'm going to feel the instruments. And it was a shock because everything, of course, was mic'd, and all I could hear was this sound field coming from the hall, from the room, and nothing from the actual instruments, right? So really, spatial sound is something that allows us to connect to characters, and that's really fundamental. So as I was saying, sound is temporal. So to get back to my train of thought, sound is temporal. It's always an event unfolding. I feel that in a script, from my experience, the three things, and that's good for a play, that's good for opera, that's good for a libretto, the things that are what I really look for in opportunities to be creative with audio and elevate storytelling are the use of time, space, and point of view. Right? It's great if you were saying, we hear this sound, sure, that's great, we're going to design this. But really, to be able to be more surreal, to be more evocative, to be more, connect more with the emotions of the people watching or participating in the piece, these are things we're looking for. So, and we talk a lot in XR, whether it's VR or spatial computing, about point of view, but never forget that that's a terrible animation. A point of view is, that's when you take Apple Keynote and transfer it to PowerPoint. So a point of view is always a point of audition, right? That's fundamental. We're gonna look at examples, but never forget that. So that's a good example. It's a piece we did with this wonderful man. It's called Miyubi. It's a 45-minute VR piece. It's free if you want to watch it. It's on Oculus Store. Go check it out. And you're a little robot about this high, and so you're a robot. Maybe you don't hear like humans do. You know, sometimes when your battery's low, perhaps your hearing goes down. It becomes 8-bit. We play with all these things because it was very clear in the play that you were a character. So when we talk about point of view and point of audition, that's the thing I feel that's fundamental when you're creating a piece. And what is the status of the user? Are you a ghost participant, or are you really a character? If I'm expected to interact, then you should make me feel that I'm really part of this world and that I've got an impact on it, right? So they're very two different trajectories. And when you're mixing them up, I'm going to give an example later on, sometimes it can be a little confusing. It's actually this. This is, I don't know if some of you have had the chance to watch this piece called Carnegie Arena by Ritchie. Personally, I think this is the greatest VR piece SIG stuff ever made, well, in the last 5 years, not a lot. But it's absolutely fantastic. So if you haven't heard about it, it's a piece about the migrants in the desert of New Mexico. And it's really, I would say, as big as half a basketball field. So you've really got this huge space to roam in. And you're bare naked, and there's actual sand, so you really feel even more immersed. And when you start this incredible piece, you're really a ghost character. There's action going on. It's really impressive, but you're not concerned up until the end. And that's a bit of an unsettling moment, which is, to me, only the weak piece, because one thing that's absolutely fabulous about this is the audio. As you know, when you're watching VR, when you're experiencing, I shouldn't say watching, right, if I'm debating for sound. So if you're experiencing VR or spatial computing, you've got headphones which allow you to have very precise localization. So I know that you're talking and not you, so it's super, super precise. But one thing that you lose is all this dynamic range, all the volume, and that's the thing that's so impressive at opera. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, we talk about XR as if it's just this one big thing, but really, as far as sound is concerned, and definitely as far as visuals are concerned, and interaction, there are differences between them, right? So as much as VR, and I'll come back to this, actually the thing I wanted to say is VR is all about suspension of disbelief. I feel that when you're putting a headset on, you're almost signing a contract saying, yeah, I really accept to be in this different reality and be taken wherever you want. The rules can be different. Maybe there's no gravity. Maybe, you know, it's for you to choose. And that's a thing you can compose with. When you're working with spatial computing, and that's Magic Leap, and there are other devices, but mainly, from my experience, the big difference is that you need to meet user expectations, right? What does it mean? For instance, if I'm with someone virtually, and this person has a bottle of water and is just putting it on the table like this, and this person has a marble table, I have a wood table, and you're doing this, if in my room it sounds like a marble table, it breaks immersion, right? So that's just an example of we need to meet user expectations. It just needs to sound, as far as audio is concerned, just needs to sound like it would in real life. You're not even at the stage of, you know, changing the rules. So that's really fundamental for presence to exist. A thing that I think are common to VR and spatial computing is level of detail. What is it? People doing textures will know what that is. Well, it does exist in sound. For instance, imagine that if you're in this person's position and there's a first robot entering through the wall, maybe you just hear one sound of the robot and it's all localized in one place. But if suddenly the robot is right here so close to me, well, I want to make sure that if there's, I don't know, footsteps on the wall, I want to hear them there. If there's vocalization coming from the robot, they should be here. Maybe there's sounds of articulations. Everything needs to be separated, right? So it might seem obvious, but that's the thing that needs to be planned in advance. Of course, if you're designing for XR, there's going to be a much longer designing time and authoring and implementation time. So expanding field of view, I think that's the obvious thing for everyone with spatial audio, meaning you know that if you're in VR, the great thing is, hey, you can direct someone's attention, something's happening behind their back. That's with audio, because you can cue anything happening anywhere. That's a piece we did for Jurassic World. So it's pretty impressive visually. If you haven't seen it, again, it's a free piece. You're in front of this T-Rex. And when we worked on this, we were told by the people, I think they're paleontologists, working on Jurassic World, they told us, I questioned them, so really, do we have an idea how they sounded? Because, by the way it's designed, it's a movie, right? It's Hollywood. But they told us that if you were that close to a T-Rex and he screamed in front of you, probably your organs would liquefy. So, might be a great thing to experience, but only once. So, of course, that's a challenge that we have with VR and XR, is if you're only wearing headphones, you've got so much dynamic range. That's the thing that in a theater, normally, when a theater is well built and the acoustics are awesome, you hear the singer and you feel the presence, even if you're at the very rear, right? So that's really fundamental, and you've got all this dynamic range. If you go to the cinema and see a film mixed in Atmos, you get all this impact. You have haptics, you've got maybe your chair is even vibrating, right? So that's the thing you need to account with. If you're gonna have volume, if you were to have, for instance, an opera singer sing virtually in front of you in VR, I can tell you that with headphones, you wouldn't get that same presence from a real person singing in front of you. I mean, if you've had the chance to experience it, it's absolutely phenomenal. Same thing for an orchestra, right? One of the affordances of VR and XR is they give you accessibility to the best seat in the house, or maybe a seat that doesn't even exist. Maybe you can be next to Esa-Pekka and listen to the orchestra. Maybe you can even be Esa-Pekka and have this perspective. But if you want to have this dynamic range, and especially if you're working on installations, and I think a lot of the projects that we see in the competition are installations, it's important to address that. So you can have great localization with headphones, super precise, and then you can get all of that volume with speaker arrays. Okay, that's really, if you want to be impactful, that's something to think about. And speaker arrays are complicated and quite expensive, so it's important to plan in advance. Another design principle I would say that I've found is a limit is, so that's an example of a piece, could be very similar to an opera set. There's a lot of fighting, martial arts going on. There's, even in those towers, there are characters. So in 360, you've got information overload. There's so much happening that you can't really discern exactly what's happening. So that's also a challenge. There are functions called focus, which we can all do this, by the way. You might have heard about the thing called the cocktail party effect, where psychoacoustically, we can all do this. We're all experts. If you're in this loud space, and oh, by the way, that's the thing. I think here you have a law which people building new buildings need to have acoustic panels. That's absolutely wonderful. We don't have that in Canada. So sometimes you're in a bar and someone is talking to you and you're like, what are you saying? And then you're actually able to focus on the person. So we can do this, but we can help the person in VR to do this. That's an example of S3A, which is a research group in England recording the BBC orchestra. And you may not see it, but there is a microphone at the top. There's another one a bit further below. There's plenty of microphones on stage. So if I assume that you may be working on a piece that will have to record an orchestra, you really need to plan in advance. It's quite complex. If you'll want to work on a 6 degrees of freedom, I assume that everyone knows what 6 degrees of freedom is versus 3def. I'll just mention it. If you're in a 360 video, you can't move, you can just do this. That's 3 degrees of freedom. 6 degrees of freedom really allows you to walk. So if, for instance, you can walk amongst the musicians and really get close to the lead violin, well, it needs to be recorded separately. Finally, and I didn't want to get too technical in this talk compared to yesterday, but I think it's important if you're going to be planning on projects and being involved, especially if you're a producer, just to get a sense of the complexity of all the audio workflow. So at the very end, not to say that it's not hard, but film is film, right? It's super established, it's all clear. Linear 360 video is a little bit more complex, but it still follows this linear workflow. Then the minute that you're going with 6 degrees of freedom, where you can walk, or if it's interactive, you're using a game engine. So you might have heard or are working already with Unity or Unreal, for instance. So the minute you use those kind of tools, you're going into a completely separate kind of workflow. And if you're used to working with sound designers, don't be surprised if you tell them where it's going to be in the game engine, and they're like, I really have no experience in that, because even in our profession, they're completely separate. So that's really bringing a level of complexity. I mentioned at the top audio middleware, really important. If you're working with Unity, for instance, the audio features are so few, you basically need to reinvent the wheel every time. Audio middleware is a piece of software that plugs into Unity or Unreal and allow your sound designers to actually be creative. And instead of having programmers recode everything, they can be very autonomous. But there's a fee for that. Then you've got AAA games. VR games, obviously, spatialization adds a bit of complexity. LBE is location-based entertainment, so I think a lot of the projects that we have in the competition are installations, so they're happening in spaces you're going to be moving into. That's LBE. It's even more complex, obviously, because there's a lot of technologies involved, and there's real-time is the key word. I think Sarah actually mentioned it. But real time just add a whole level of complexity. Everything can break. You need a backup. There's plenty of strategies to adapt. And LB with immersive speaker array is even more complex, but so rewarding. So that was a quick word on spatial audio. I hope it's been helpful. I'm looking forward to meet you after if you're interested, and if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to hear them. Thank you.